Okay, so let's continue now. As I said, this is going to be a bit wordy in terms of the number of paragraphs of the book that I'm going to read, just because there are personal philosophical assumptions of the author, so that as we follow on to the other chapters, we try to carry these assumptions along. Assumptions about what constitutes our world. The world is dynamic and complex, although parts of our world are determined by processes over which human action has little influence, for example, the tidal cycle or movement of tectonic plates. Human activity has increasingly become the most important determining factor of our future. So we don't have impact on the tidal cycles, but sea level rise and tidal cycles can act together to do damage to the human environmental system that we are kind of ignoring. Plus, the human activities like fracking and so on are found to introduce so-called micro earthquakes or seismic activities, and we don't know if that is going to amount to a big earthquake someday. And even the amount of water that is loaded behind dams, the cycle of loading and unloading that water, storing and releasing water, is supposed to create pressure on the plates and trigger some seismic activities. So let's go along with this assumption here. However, regardless of what our world is determined by, this book rests on the assumption that the world does not exist no matter if I am around to observe it or not. The alternative would seem rather egocentric, that the world exists because of us observing it. However, such realistic ontology entails a distinction between the empirical, the actual, and the real domains, where the first covers our experience of events through observation, second covers events whether observed or not, and the third covers the real processes behind them. The world is in the order, the world is, in other words, there but not directly available to us. I explain what I mean with that in the following section. But I want you to imagine a landscape with rolling hills and assume that it's still there when you're not. Okay, so really philosophical words, but nonetheless, here is a rolling hill. World is there even if I'm not there to observe. Thank you. Assumption about what constitutes knowledge. In a world that is not accessible through direct observation, where the empirical rests on our experiences, there can be no objective search for truth. This was proposed by Kuhn in 1970 as well in a certain context. In other words, meaning cannot be discovered but must rather be constructed through social processes in which there is a constant struggle over what is considered to be true or false. Imagine the landscape again. What do you see? I argue that what you see is likely to depend on who you are, what you have on your mind, who else you are with, etc. Greider and Garkovich illustrate this with a brilliant simplicity. Every river is more than just one river. Every rock is more than just one rock. What does a real estate developer look across? Why does a real estate developer look across an open field and see comfortable suburban ranch homes nestled in quiet cul-de-sacs, while a farmer envisions endless rows of waving wheat and a hunter sees a 5-point buck cautiously grazing in preparation for the coming winter? Well, quite poetic, but we don't have just the quite the luxury of seeing the 5-point bucks cautiously grazing all the time. What the real estate agent, farmer, and hunter know about the same landscape varies substantially, as the philosophical base for knowledge rests on social practice, on practical knowledge of people acting and utilizing artifacts in specific social contexts. Even if the real estate agent and hunter happen to be the same person, the person may see the landscape with two hats on, as we say, one at a time. This argument follows John Dewey's pragmatic philosophy, in which thought and action never can be separated, as meaning and knowledge are forged in action. His philosophy of knowledge is also inclusive in the sense that everyone is capable of Let me read again. His philosophy of knowledge is also inclusive in the sense that everyone is a capable participant in generating knowledge. But what is knowledge then? So Frank Ramsey, another pragmatic philosopher, distinguishes between knowledge from belief by stating that belief is knowledge only if it is formed in a reliable process and never leads to mistakes. The definition: it's thus inadequate to believe something regardless of the amount of empirical support for it if that belief leads to errors. This is much in line with Popper's idea of falsification, in which a theory ceases to be a theory when falsified through empirical observation. So in science, usually you have data. Data allows you to form a hypothesis. Then you collect more data to test the hypothesis, and if the hypothesis is tested to be positive, then it becomes a theory. So the theory, is null and void if empirical observations find that it's not always valid, or there may be exceptions. For instance, Galileo Galilei's observations that universe did in fact revolve around the earth, or William Harvey's observation that it was in fact the same type of blood flowing through both the veins and arteries. Falsification is in this approach the only genuine way for testing theory, which means that empirical observation may at best be consistent with a theory but can never prove it. This is generally true about science. Science proposes theories and you keep finding data that basically are consistent with the theory. Knowledge thus comprises beliefs in whose validity we are reasonably confident. So over time, theory may just become the accepted truth. Ramsey looks upon theory as being divided into existing entities, here alpha, beta and gamma, axioms, and a dictionary which can be expressed as epsilon, alpha, beta, gamma, dictionary axioms, and is referred to as the Ramsey sentence. Here the entities are the building blocks of theory, the axioms are the rules of how entities function and interact with each other, and the dictionary is our ability to find the entities and axioms in the empirical domain of the world. We are getting a little further away from sustainability principles as such, but we'll use these later. The Ramsey sentence not only helps us to understand the relationship between theoretical and empirical, but also gives us a philosophical framework for managing the complexity in what we perceive when observing the real world. Ramsey distinguishes between the world, which is home to what we try to explain and understand, and our theoretical construction, which is a tool for making sense of the world. In other words, in order to grasp the complexity of reality, we need to implicitly or explicitly create models of it, or human environmental systems as they are referred to throughout this book. The vital link between reality and our models is our capability to identify what is relevant to include for what we attempt to explain, understand or improve, as well as what is relevant to include for what we attempt to explain, understand or improve, as well as our capability to test our hypothesis for that particular explanation, understanding and improvement. Going back to the landscape again, the real estate agent, farmer and hunter would include very different things in their mental models of the rolling hills. For instance, the real estate agent may include the urban areas within commuting distance, the farmer may include soil nutrients, while the hunter may include an estimation of a safe shooting angle toward the hills. The landscape is the same, but our knowledge of it is socially constructed in the context. So this part is important because mental models are what we use implicitly or explicitly to always look at the environment, other human beings. We will go through the book of Marco Jansen and Andries, I think, which is on sustaining the commons, where we define action arena, action situation, actors, rules, norms, punishments. So that's another way of saying how mental models work and how multiple mental models interact with each other every day: the seller, the buyer, the insurer, the insured, and driver and passenger, and so on and so forth. So repeated interactions lead to implicitly understood mental models, and this is what is being implied here. So Ramsey's link between the theory and empirical observations, so there are entities, there are axioms, and there is an implicit or explicit dictionary that's using the theory based on these things in the empirical world, and that allows us to interact with each other and with the environment on a daily basis, sometimes repeatedly in the same action situation, or sometimes travel and be in a new situation, new language, and still continue to interact for work or for leisure or whatever, right? So these are kind of implicit in the way we live, but when you put formal definitions behind them, it becomes a little wordy and sounds complicated, but they are still important to formalize them, because when you start to do sustainability and human environment systems, you need these models, and depending on the situation you may include different things. So if you want to be sustainable in water alone as opposed to water and agriculture, your model may include very different things, right? So assumption, maybe I should yeah, this is a bit long, so let's see how long is this podcast. Yeah, it's already 11 minutes, so let me stop it there and come back and we'll talk about assumption about values.